All right, today we are diving into something called the Safe Dissipation Hypothesis. And trust me, it's a pretty radical new way of looking at one of the oldest, biggest questions out there.
And that question is simply this: how does anything last? I mean, really think about it. From a tiny single cell all the way up to an entire civilization. What's the secret sauce? What allows these complex things to hang on against the constant, relentless pull of chaos?
Well, here's the big idea. The Safe Dissipation Hypothesis suggests the answer isn't some magic ingredient or a hidden life force. Nope. It's actually more like a rule book, a fundamental grammar that dictates the very nature of persistence. And over the next few minutes, we're going to figure out how to read it together. So, this rule book, this is the Safe Dissipation Hypothesis. It basically lays out the non-negotiable physical laws for how any system, and I mean any system, from a star to a stock market, actually manages to stick around.
But, and this is a big but, before we can even crack open this rulebook, we have to understand its very first and most important principle, how to use it the right way. They call it Principle Zero, and honestly, it's the key that unlocks everything else.
So Principle Zero is all about helping us avoid this really common mental trap. It's got a fancy name: ontological pareidolia. You know how you sometimes see a face in the clouds or a shape in a piece of toast? Well, this is that same kind of mistake, just on a much grander scale. We start seeing purpose or intention or some grand design in things where they're just, well, material processes doing their thing.
And that distinction is absolutely crucial. As you can see here, the hypothesis is like a wiring diagram. It's a grammar. It describes how a system is built to last. But what it is not is some kind of cosmic force that explains why the system exists in the first place. It's a how tool, not a why answer. Super important to remember that. Okay, so with that foundation laid, we can finally get to the good stuff, the real heart of the hypothesis. Let's dig into the 4 fundamental pillars of existence. These are the rules of the game that apply to literally any system that manages to endure.
All right, Pillar 1 is conditional dissipation. The best way to think about this is to imagine a bucket with a small hole in it, and it's under a running faucet. Now, to keep that bucket from just emptying out, to persist, the water coming in has to be compatible with the water flowing out. See, it's not about being perfectly sealed off from the world. It's about managing that inevitable loss in a way that's sustainable. Every single thing that lasts does this. Okay, now Pillar 2. This one's a bit of a mind bender. It's called structural metastability. And what it says is that real lasting stability isn't about being solid and unchanging like a rock. No, it's about being in constant dynamic motion, kind of like a cyclist. The second that cyclist stops pedaling, what happens? They lose their balance and they fall over. Systems that last are always in motion.
I just love this way of framing it. Persistence really is a tightrope walk. You're too rigid, you snap. You're too loose, and you just fall apart. The systems that endure are the ones that have mastered that tricky, dynamic balancing act right in the middle.
Pillar 3 is entropic incompatibility, and this gives us a totally new way to think about why systems collapse. So imagine a factory that was built to run on coal. If the world suddenly runs out of coal, that factory doesn't stop working because something attacked it from the outside. It stops working because its internal process, its whole way of being, is now incompatible with its environment. The way it works just doesn't work anymore.
And that brings us to our 4th and final pillar, the relational field. This one sounds simple, but it is so profound. Nothing, and I mean nothing, persists in a vacuum. A tree can't exist without soil and sun and water, right? Its ability to persist is actually a property that emerges from all of those relationships. Endurance is always a team effort between a system and its environment.
So let's just put those 4 pillars together real quick. To last, any system has to 1. Manage its losses. 2. Do it in a very specific, compatible way. 3. Constantly change and adapt. And 4. Exist as part of a bigger network. That's it. That is the physical bedrock of endurance.
Okay, so those are the universal rules of the game. Now let's take a look at how the greatest player of all time actually follows them. How does life itself put these principles into action?
Life, it turns out, uses this brilliant 4-part strategy. First, modulation. Just think about how we sweat to cool down. We're actively managing our energy. Second, interfaces. A cell wall is the perfect example, right? It's a control point for what comes in and what goes out. Third, redundancy. We've got 2 kidneys, 2 lungs, backup systems for the really important stuff. And fourth, variability. Life is constantly trying out little variations, that's basically evolution, to find out what works best. It's a whole strategy of active management and built-in resilience.
And here's where we gotta pull ourselves back and remember Principle Zero. This incredible, complex, four-part strategy, it doesn't have a designer. There's no grand plan. There's no goal. Life isn't trying to survive. This is just the material pattern that, over billions of years, has proven that it doesn't immediately self-destruct. It's the ultimate example of, hey, if it works, it works.
Okay, so this is obviously a really powerful framework. But with any powerful tool, you've got to be careful about how you use it. The hypothesis actually has these built-in safety features to make sure it gets used for real scientific understanding, not as some kind of weapon to justify the way things are. And these are the scientific guardrails. First, whatever you claim has to be testable with real-world data. Second, it really hammers home that we're looking at results, not goals. A snowflake has a beautiful, complex pattern, but it doesn't have a purpose. And third, it tells us to avoid lazy analogies. An economy might share some principles with a living cell, sure, but an economy is not a cell. You have to respect the fundamental differences between things.
And this brings us to the most powerful and, potentially the most risky application of this whole hypothesis, using it to analyze human social systems. But before we even go there, we need to read the big, bright red warning label.
And that warning is this, and it is absolutely non-negotiable. Persistence does not equal legitimacy. Just because a social system, a government, an institution, an economy manages to stick around for a long time, that does not make it good or just or necessary or right.
And this slide lays it out perfectly. It is totally okay to use the hypothesis to describe how a system works, to find its weak spots, or analyze how it's structured. But it is never okay to use it to justify the fact that it works that way. You can't use this to argue that, say, social inequality is natural just because it's persisted for a long time. It's a diagnostic tool, not a moral compass. Description? Yes. Justification? Absolutely not.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, at its heart, the safe dissipation hypothesis isn't really a set of answers. It's more like a new lens, a new way of seeing the world.
So no, the safe dissipation hypothesis doesn't give us the final, ultimate answer for why anything exists. What it does give us is a disciplined, really powerful grammar. It's a tool that helps us understand how it's even possible for all the complex systems around us and inside of us to keep on keeping on, moment to moment, day after day.
Which leaves us with one last, pretty big question to chew on. If this whole intricate, amazing dance of persistence, from our own bodies to our entire civilization, is really just a material process without some grand purpose or plan, well, what does that change about how we see our own place within it all? Something to think about. Thanks so much for tuning in.